For 3 years, she watched her coworker leave at 4:30 every single day. He never stayed late. He never took the extra project. He left at 4:30 like the building was about to catch fire. She stayed until 6, sometimes 7. She was better at the work and she knew it. She told herself he was coasting, that the gap between their situations would eventually show. 5 years later, his situation looked nothing like hers. He had assets. She had overtime. The hardest working people you have ever met are not the wealthiest people you have ever met. The proof was sitting one desk away from her for years, and she missed it completely. Here is the question nobody stops long enough to ask. If working harder actually built wealth, why do the hardest workers so rarely have any? The answer is not what you have been told. It is not about luck. It is not about connections or privilege or being in the right room. It is about a mechanism, a specific, learnable, repeatable mechanism that the people with real money figured out and that the people without it were never shown. What you are about to hear is not motivation. It is not a reminder to believe in yourself. It is a precise explanation of why effort has a ceiling, why that ceiling is lower than you think, and what sits on the other side of it. By the time this is over, you will not see your working hours the same way you see them right now. That is not a promise about someday. It starts in the next 60 seconds. Chapter 1. Harder workers die poorer somehow. Every civilization that has ever risen and crumbled left behind the same unspoken agreement. Work hard. Suffer well. Wait your turn. Across centuries and continents, in languages that no longer exist, ordinary people were handed the same bargain and told it was a law of nature. The ones who labored most would eventually inherit the most. That agreement felt moral. It felt fair. And for most of human history, most people never stopped long enough to check whether it was actually true. You are stopping now. What you are about to hear will not sound like anything a career counselor, a motivational speaker, or a well-meaning parent ever told you. Because what you are about to hear is the thing those sources never examined. The agreement was always broken. It was broken before you were born. And the fact that you feel behind right now, tired and underpaid and somehow still running, is not evidence of your failure. It is evidence that you were handed a map drawn to lead you somewhere other than where you wanted to go. Here is a number that should bother you. The average person in a developed country will work somewhere between 80,000 and 100,000 hours across their entire lifetime. That is every early morning, every late shift, every meeting, every commute added up into one number. Now here is another number. Most people who log every single one of those hours retire with less than $100,000 saved. Some retire with far less. Some retire with nothing at all but a health insurance question and a small monthly deposit they cannot actually live on. You do the arithmetic and something does not add up. It does not add up because the premise was wrong from the start. Consider 2 people. One cleans office buildings 5 nights a week. He has been doing it for 11 years. He owns 3 small rental units, bought one at a time, starting with a down payment scraped together from a tax refund and a side sale on used equipment. He works hard, but his properties work while he sleeps. The other person is a mid-level operations manager at a regional firm. She works 60 hours a week, has worked that way for 9 years. Smart, competent, respected. Her net worth, outside a thin retirement account she cannot touch for decades without penalty, is close to 0, maybe slightly negative if you count the car. Two people, one with far more hours, status, and credentials on paper, one who owns actual income-producing property. The difference in their financial positions is not explained by work ethic. It is not explained by intelligence. It is explained by a single structural fact. One of them built something that earns while they rest. The other one did not. This is not an accident, and it is not personal. There is a question this chapter is going to hold open for a few minutes. If working hard is not the path to wealth, what exactly is the relationship between effort and money? Stay with that. The answer is more specific than most people expect, and it comes with a ceiling most people never see until they have already hit it. Remember your ordinary days before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. Not emotionally, financially. Were you working as hard then as you are now? Were you busy? Were you telling yourself that if you just pushed through this next phase, the finances would catch up? And now, 3 years later, how much further ahead are you in actual numbers? Not in skills gained or experience earned, but in net worth, in assets, in money that exists when you are not actively trading your hours for it. For a lot of people listening right now, the honest answer is uncomfortable. 3 years of effort, and the gap between you and financial security is about the same size, maybe larger. The effort was real. The outcome did not match. That discomfort is actually useful. It is the first signal that the map you were given was drawn wrong. There was a man named Darius who worked in a bottling plant in a mid-sized city for most of his adult life. He worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes 6 days a week. He never called in sick. His supervisors respected him. When other workers cut corners, Darius did not. He had a reputation for reliability that ran all the way up the chain. When the plant offered overtime, Darius took it. Overtime paid 1.5 times his rate. At 1.5 times his rate, he could buy his daughter better school shoes and put a small amount into a savings account that earned almost nothing. He was not lazy. No one who knew him would have used that word. But Darius was 71 years old when he retired. He retired with savings that would last him approximately 4 years at modest spending. He had worked for 46 years. He had given his best hours to people who owned the plant. The plant kept running after he left. Nothing he built kept running after he left. His income stopped the moment he did. Darius is not a cautionary tale about character. He is a diagram of a system. The system has a law built into it. It is not a metaphor. It is a mathematical constraint. When that clicks, you will not be able to unsee it from that point on. Every dollar you earn from effort has 2 inputs, your time and your rate. Multiply those together and you get your income ceiling. $100 an hour times 40 hours a week equals $4,000. You can raise the rate. You can add more hours, but you cannot add hours beyond the number that exists in a week. And your body, your attention, your health all impose limits long before you reach that mathematical edge. There is a hard biological ceiling on income that comes from labor, not a soft ceiling, not a ceiling you can hustle through with enough caffeine and discipline. A hard ceiling made of the fixed number of hours in a human life, and the fixed number of those hours a body can sustain at productive output. Wealthy people do not earn above this ceiling by working harder. They earn above it by building income that operates outside the ceiling entirely. This is the revelation that hustle culture was never designed to deliver, because hustle culture needs workers. It needs people at the bottling plant, at the law firm, at the tech company, logging their hours diligently and telling themselves the hours are the point. The people who own the plant do not work at the plant. The people who own the building your office is in do not manage your building. They built or bought something that earns independently of their physical presence. They stepped outside the ceiling, while everyone else kept pushing against it from below. This is where the word lazy becomes interesting. In a system built around effort, the person who is not visibly laboring looks suspicious, looks like a problem, looks like someone to look down on. But here is the question worth sitting with. What if the person doing less looks like that because they already built the thing that lets them do less? What if rest is not laziness but evidence of a completed structure? An architect draws a blueprint and steps back. The building stands without the architect inside it. A laborer must show up or the work stops. One of them built something that outlives their presence. The other one is still present because they have to be. Down the line in this book, we arrive at an argument about doing nothing that runs straight against the usual belief. When that idea snaps into focus, it reshapes how you act on an ordinary Tuesday. But right now, at the start, the first thing to understand is this. The effort-equals-outcome equation is not a universal law. It is a useful belief for people who need other people to keep showing up. It was handed to you early, reinforced constantly, and it has a cost you have been paying without a name for it. The cost is the gap between how hard you work and how much your money grows while you sleep. For most people, their money does not grow while they sleep. It sits, or it shrinks, while someone else's money, built on a different structure, runs quietly through the night, adding to itself. You are not behind because you did not work hard enough. You are behind because no one showed you how to build something that works while you do not. The question the next chapter answers is this: what does that building actually look like from the inside, and what does it cost to start the first wall? Chapter 2. Lazy is a diagnosis they got wrong. Every person who has ever been called lazy believes one thing about themselves. They believe it is true. Most of them carry it like a stone in their chest, this quiet, corrosive conviction that something is broken in them, some missing wire that other people have and they do not. They have believed this for so long that they stopped questioning where the diagnosis came from. But here is what nobody told you. That diagnosis was made by people who needed you to be busy. And busy, as you are about to see, is not the same thing as rich. The building described in the last chapter, the one you are constructing wall by wall while others rent space inside it, it does not get built through more effort. It gets built through a specific kind of refusal. The refusal to trade your hours for a number someone else decided your hours are worth. That refusal has a name. The name people gave it was laziness. They were wrong, not slightly wrong. Wrong in a way that has cost an entire generation real money, real time, and real freedom. Here is the question this chapter is going to hold open for a while. If laziness is a flaw, why do the wealthiest people in the world do the least amount of direct, hourly, supervised work? Sit with that. The answer is coming, but not yet. Think about Marcus. He is 31 years old, lives in Columbus, Ohio, and he dropped out of his second year of community college at 19 because he could not make himself care about the coursework. Not because it was hard, because it felt like a long hallway that led to a small room. His advisor called him unfocused. His father, who worked 26 years in the same manufacturing plant, called him ungrateful. Marcus called himself lost, which at the time felt the same as lazy. He worked a series of jobs after that: warehouse logistics, a brief and disastrous attempt at door-to-door insurance sales, 3 months stocking shelves on a night shift. Every job ended the same way, not with a firing but with a slow internal shutdown. Like a phone battery that drains faster and faster the more apps you force it to run. At 22, Marcus moved into a duplex his uncle owned. The rent was low, the building was old, and the other unit sat empty for 8 months. Marcus watched his uncle lose money every month on a property that had 2 units but only 1 tenant. One afternoon, with nothing particular to do, Marcus started doing the math. Not because someone told him to. Because the numbers looked wrong, and wrong numbers bothered him in a way that wrong feelings never did. He found a tenant for the empty unit. He negotiated the placement fee down to nothing by doing the showing himself. The unit started generating income. His uncle, impressed, let Marcus manage both units in exchange for a small monthly cut. Within 18 months, Marcus had saved enough from that cut, combined with almost nothing from a part-time delivery job, to put a down payment on a single-family rental property in a working-class neighborhood 15 minutes from where he grew up. The house needed paint and new kitchen fixtures. Marcus hired the paint and taught himself the fixtures from a 40-minute video. 2 years after that, he owned 3 properties. By 29, the number was 7. Today it is 11, with a combined value just over $2 million, and Marcus has not held a W-2 job in 6 years. When people hear that story, the first question is almost always about the money. Where did the down payments come from? How did he qualify for mortgages without steady employment income? Those are fair questions, and there are practical answers that will come later in this book. But those questions miss the real lesson. The real lesson is what Marcus refused to do. He refused to take the path that would have given him a ceiling, not because he was strategic or visionary at 22. He was barely either of those things. He refused because something in him recognized, without being able to name it, that trading 40 hours a week for a fixed wage felt like being charged full price for half a product. His body rejected it before his brain could explain why. And the world called that rejection laziness. Here is the revelation. What society diagnoses as laziness is very often the unconscious recognition that a particular deal is bad. Your nervous system does a calculation your rational mind has not finished yet. It adds up the hours, the rate, the ceiling on what those hours can ever produce, and it sends a signal: resistance, reluctance, the inability to care. That signal is not a malfunction. It is pattern recognition intelligence operating below the level of language. The problem is not the signal. The problem is that nobody teaches you what to do with it. Look back at where things really stood before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. The job you were working or the one you were avoiding. The tasks you could not make yourself complete, no matter how many times you set an alarm or made a list. Now ask yourself honestly, was the resistance truly about effort? Or was some part of you already calculating that the effort had no ceiling high enough to justify the cost? That is a serious question. Let it sit. The effort equals outcome equation is the core architecture of the hustle myth. Work harder, earn more. Put in the hours, get the reward. The equation sounds fair because it contains a partial truth. In the early stages of almost any financial life, effort does produce results. You work more shifts, you get more pay. You take on more clients, you bring in more revenue. The equation holds, but only up to a point. And that point is what nobody marks on the chart. The effort ceiling is invisible until you hit it. Then it is the most solid thing you have ever felt. You cannot work harder than 24 hours in a day. You cannot bill more hours than you have. You cannot scale your presence. The moment you stop, the income stops. No amount of hustle dissolves that wall because the wall is structural. It is built into the design of the trade time for money model. The model was never meant to make you wealthy. It was meant to make you productive for someone else's building. Marcus did not know this in those terms at 22, but his resistance knew it. His inability to stay in the warehouse, to care about the insurance quota, to show up again and again for a number someone else set, that was not weakness. That was an early and unpolished form of the architect's instinct. The instinct that says, I will not be labor in someone else's structure when I can learn to build my own. The difference between an architect and a laborer is not intelligence. It is not talent. It is not even work ethic, which will surprise you until you think about it carefully. The architect works intensely during the design phase. Then the building holds itself. The laborer works every day the building requires maintenance. One person's sleeping hours generate money. The other person's sleeping hours generate rest and nothing else. That gap, compounded over 10 years, is the distance between someone who is comfortable and someone who is free. Sleeping money. That phrase will return throughout this book, not because it is poetic, but because it is the most accurate way to describe what passive income actually does. It moves while you are still. It earns while you rest. It does not wait for you to show up. And the only way to build it is to stop spending your best hours on systems designed to cap what you can earn. A little later, you are going to meet a claim about risk that runs straight against the usual belief. Once that lands, it alters every financial decision you make from that point forward. For now, stay with Marcus. He will come back. There is a moment in his story, around year 4, when everything nearly collapsed. A bad tenant, a flooded basement, and a city notice that threatened his entire portfolio. That moment belongs in a later chapter, because what Marcus did in that moment is the difference between someone who builds wealth once and someone who keeps it. You will meet that version of him again. What matters now is the diagnosis. Lazy is a word the system uses for people who see through one of its core products. The product is compliance. The compliance is purchased with a wage. The wage is designed to be just enough to make leaving feel dangerous. If you have ever felt lazy, if you have ever been called lazy, if you have ever watched yourself fail to care about something you were supposed to care about, ask the better question. Not what is wrong with you. Ask what your resistance already knew. The system needs workers. Workers need wages. Wages need effort ceilings. And effort ceilings need a story. The story they chose was laziness. You were never the problem. The ceiling was. Chapter 3. Money that works while you sleep. Saving harder will never make you wealthy. That sounds like an excuse someone gives themselves to stop trying. It is not an excuse. It is arithmetic. The amount of money you can save is bounded by the amount you earn. The amount you earn is bounded by how many hours you can sell. And hours are the one thing no one has ever figured out how to manufacture more of. This chapter is not about saving smarter. It is not about budgeting apps or cutting subscriptions. It is about a completely different category of financial activity, one that the people who assign you work have quietly arranged their own lives around, while publicly praising your discipline for doing without. The question is not whether money can work while you sleep. Money has always done that. The question is whose money is working and whether any of it is yours. The ceiling was. A question from the last chapter is still with us, and it is still in the room, staring at a hard limit built into the very structure of how you earn. You could press against it. You could grind and optimize and hustle until you had extracted every available dollar from your time, and you would still be capped, not by lack of ambition, by design. Passive income is the architectural response to that ceiling. But before you can build it, you need to understand what it actually is. Most people have a version of it in their heads that is almost completely wrong. Here is the thing most people get backwards. They think passive income is a product. They picture a downloadable course, a rental property, a stock portfolio. Things you create or buy and then sell or collect from. But a product is a what? Passive income is a how. It is a system designed once that generates returns repeatedly without requiring a proportional input of your time each time it runs. The product is just one possible component inside that system. The system is the thing. Think about it this way. Imagine a grid with two axes. On one axis, you have active income on the left side and passive income on the right. On the other axis, you have linear returns at the bottom and compounding returns at the top. Most people spend their entire working lives in the bottom left corner, active and linear. You do an hour of work, you receive payment for 1 hour of work. Clean transaction, completely fair, also a trap, because you can never escape that corner without changing the structure of how you earn, not just the amount. Sleeping money lives in the right side of that grid. The question is whether it also climbs. There are 3 categories of passive income. Understanding them as distinct architectural structures is what separates the people who eventually escape the bottom left from the people who buy a course about passive income and remain exactly where they were. The first category is asset-based income. This is money generated by owning something that other people want to use or rent. A property. A piece of intellectual property like a book or a license. A portfolio of dividend-paying stocks. The key structural feature here is ownership. You are not selling your time. You are collecting a fee for access to something you hold. The initial work is the acquisition, buying the asset, creating the intellectual property, accumulating the shares. After that, the asset does the work, not you. Mara was a graphic designer in her late 20s, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in a mid-sized city, charging clients by the hour for logos and brand packages. She was good. Clients referred other clients. Her hourly rate climbed. Then one afternoon she sat down and did the math. She realized that even at full capacity, working every available hour, she had a ceiling. She could see it clearly, a specific number, and it was not enough. So she stopped selling hours for a moment and started selling a thing. She took 6 weeks and built a set of brand identity templates. Clean, professional, designed to be sold as a digital download for small business owners who could not afford her hourly rate. She priced them at $47. In the first month she sold 11. Not life-changing, but here is what changed. 3 years later, she had 16 template packs on the market. Those templates were generating roughly $2,000 a month while she slept, traveled, or took on only the client work she actually wanted. She had not quit her design career. She had built a second structure beside it, one that ran without her. The templates were a product. The system behind them, the distribution platform, the pricing strategy, the way each template led buyers toward the next one, that was the architecture. An architecture, once built, does not need to clock in. The second category is equity-based income. This is money generated by owning a stake in something that grows in value and distributes that value back to you. The clearest version of this is index fund investing. You buy a small fraction of hundreds of companies at once. Those companies earn money. Some of that money comes back to you as dividends. The total value of your stake grows as the companies grow. You did not run those companies. You did not sit in their meetings or manage their employees. You simply owned a piece, and ownership has a return. The structural feature here is that your money compounds, not linearly. When the return from your stake gets reinvested, it earns its own return, and that return earns a return. The longer the system runs, the faster it produces without any additional input from you. This is the only category of passive income where time itself is the primary ingredient. Not skill, not hustle, not grinding. Time and ownership and the willingness to leave the system alone. Return to where things really stood before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. Not in terms of your ambitions, in terms of your actual financial structure. Were there any systems generating money for you without your direct involvement? If the answer is no, the question worth sitting with is not why you failed. The question is whether you had ever been shown what such a system would look like, what it would feel like to build one, or whether everything around you was pointing you back toward the bottom left corner of that grid and calling it virtue. The third category is network-based income. This is money generated by the size, trust, or activity of an audience or community you have built. A newsletter with 10,000 readers who pay a monthly subscription. A social channel that generates ad revenue through views. An affiliate relationship where you recommend products and collect a percentage of each sale. The structural feature here is reach. You create once an email, a video, a post, and it works across every person in your network simultaneously. 10 people see it or 10,000 people see it. Your time investment was the same either way. Network-based income is the most misunderstood of the three. People hear it and think it requires fame. It does not. It requires consistency and specificity. A newsletter about personal finance for freelance nurses, written by someone who was once a freelance nurse, built slowly over 2 years with 8,000 subscribers, can generate a steady passive income. That has nothing to do with fame and everything to do with trust in a narrow lane. Now here is something that tends to stop people at this point. It is worth naming directly. Every one of these categories requires upfront work. Asset-based income requires acquisition or creation. Equity-based income requires accumulation, putting money in regularly before the compounding kicks in at a level that matters. Network-based income requires showing up consistently before the network is large enough to generate returns. None of these is passive on day one. And this is where the hustle myth sneaks back in through the side door. It whispers that you are still just working in a different direction. What is the real difference? The difference is what you are building. A laborer builds output. An architect builds a system. The laborer's work disappears when they stop. The architect's system keeps running. Both people work hard in the early stages, but the laborer's effort is consumed the moment it is spent. The architect's effort accumulates into structure. You are not choosing between working and not working. You are choosing what your work leaves behind. Further on, you are going to meet a claim about starting from zero that runs straight against the usual belief. When that becomes clear, it alters the first financial decision you make every month. The sleeping money motif matters here because sleep is the honest test. If your income stops the moment you are unavailable, sick, resting, occupied, asleep, then what you have is a job. A good job, maybe. A well-paid job, possibly. But a job with all the structural limits that word implies. Sleeping money does not care whether you are awake. It does not care whether you had a productive day or a wasted one. It runs because you built something that runs. That is the distinction that the people who manage your time would rather you not think about too clearly. Go back to the grid. Active, passive, linear, compounding. Most of the financial advice aimed at people your age is about moving up the left side of that grid. Earning more per hour, negotiating better rates, building skills that command higher fees. All of that is legitimate. None of it breaks the ceiling. Moving to the right side of the grid is the only structural escape from the effort-equals-outcome equation that has been sold to you since your first paycheck. You do not need to move all at once. Nobody builds all three categories simultaneously. The path almost always starts with one, chosen based on what you currently have more of: time, capital, or audience. You build the first structure. You let it run. Then you use what it produces to build the second. That is the architecture of sleeping money, not a single product, not a single clever idea. A deliberately constructed sequence of systems, each one releasing you slightly further from the bottom left corner of the grid, each one adding another source of income that does not require you to be present to exist. Passive income is not a product you sell once. It is a system that sells itself while you are somewhere else, living the life you built it to protect. The question now is which of the three categories you can build first, and whether what is stopping you is actually a lack of resources or a belief you have not examined yet. Chapter 4. The first asset nobody calls an asset. Right now, while you are listening to this, money is leaving you, not through spending, not through any choice you are consciously making. It is leaving through a slower mechanism, through the gap between what your time currently produces and what it could produce if it were pointed differently. That gap is not a number you can see on a bank statement, but it is real, and it compounds every single week. The person who closes that gap this year will be in a fundamentally different position in 5 years than the person who closes it 2 years from now. The difference is not dramatic in the short term. It becomes enormous over time. The gap does not close on its own. What keeps it open is not laziness. It is not lack of discipline. It is a specific piece of missing information, a category of asset that almost nobody names correctly, which means almost nobody builds it on purpose. That category is what this chapter is about, and once you see it clearly, you will not be able to unsee it. The question the last chapter left with you was this: which of the three categories can you build first, and is what is stopping you actually a lack of resources or a belief you have not examined yet? That question deserves a direct answer, and the answer will surprise you because it points towards something you may already have. Here is the thing about assets. When most people hear that word, they picture something they had to buy: a rental property, a stock portfolio, a business with employees and overhead, and a lease on a building. These are real assets and they matter. But they share one feature that almost nobody talks about honestly. They require capital to start. You need money to get them. Which means if you do not have money yet, the conventional asset map leaves you standing outside, looking in, told to save harder and wait longer. That waiting has a cost. You already felt that in the first paragraph of this chapter. So the real question is not whether assets matter. The question is whether there is a class of asset that does not require capital to build, and whether that class can eventually purchase the capital-intensive ones for you. There is, and almost nobody calls it an asset. Picture where things really stood before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. Not in abstract terms, actually picture it. The apartment, the job, the conversations you were having about money. Think about what you knew then compared to what you know now. That distance, that specific gap between what you understood then and what you understand today, represents something that has real value to people who are still standing where you were. The knowledge gap you have crossed is not just personal growth. In the right format, directed at the right people, it is an asset, a compounding one. This is the open loop this chapter is going to hold for a moment. If knowledge can function as an asset, why do almost nobody treat it that way, and what exactly has to happen before knowledge converts into income you do not have to work for every day? Set that question aside for now. We will come back to it before the chapter ends. Meet a woman named Dara. She worked as a project coordinator for a mid-sized construction company, managing timelines and contractor communications. She was not a developer. She did not own property. But after 3 years in that role, she knew something most people do not. She knew exactly how residential permitting worked in her county. She knew which contractors consistently underpriced their bids. She knew which material costs were inflated by about 40% when homeowners hired without knowing what to ask. She knew this the way someone who sits inside a system knows it, not from a course, not from a book, but from watching the same patterns repeat until they became obvious. One evening she started writing a free newsletter, 1 email per week. Practical, specific, unglamorous information for first-time home renovators in her region, not nationwide, not the world, just her county and the 2 neighboring ones. She wrote in plain language. She named real numbers. She did not have a brand. She barely had a logo. 18 months later, that newsletter had 4,000 subscribers. Local contractors began paying to be listed in a recommended vendor section. A regional real estate attorney offered her a flat monthly fee to mention his services once per month. She had not quit her job. She had not launched a product. She had not done anything most people would call entrepreneurial, but she was earning $1,100 a month from a document she wrote once per week in about 2 hours on Sunday afternoons. Dara did not start with capital. She started with specific knowledge, a narrow audience, and consistency. The money came after the asset existed, not before. Notice what just happened there. A beat of silence where the lesson could be explained. But the lesson does not need explaining. What it needs is a frame. The frame is this. Attention is an asset. Audience is an asset. Intellectual property, meaning something you created that can be read, watched, listened to, or used without you being physically present when it is consumed, is an asset. These 3 things can be built before you have a single dollar to invest. And more importantly, they are the mechanism through which capital eventually arrives. This is where hustle culture gets something dangerously wrong. The equation it sells you is effort equals outcome. Work more, earn more. Grind harder, grow faster. That equation is true up to a point. It is true in the same way that carrying water in your hands is a valid way to move water. You can do it. The effort produces a result. But there is a ceiling. The ceiling is your body, your hours, your available attention. The moment you stop carrying, the water stops moving. That is the effort ceiling. Every person who earns money only through direct labor has hit it, whether they have named it or not. The architect does not build the house by hand. The architect draws something, and that drawing produces results across time without the architect being physically present at every nail. What you are building when you build attention, audience, and intellectual property is your first drawing, your first architecture. Here is what makes this genuinely different from standard advice about side hustles. A side hustle is still labor. It is a second job dressed in an appealing metaphor. A freelance client you serve, a gig you fulfill, a product you ship by hand, these expand your effort ceiling slightly, but they do not break it. What breaks the ceiling is something that earns while it exists, not only while you are actively producing it. Dara's newsletter sent itself to 4,000 inboxes every Sunday morning, whether she was awake or not. The contractor listings renewed on an annual basis. She had built something that continued to function without her standing there doing labor. That is sleeping money. Not in the sense that it requires you to be passive from the very start. Building always requires effort. But it is money that eventually sleeps when you do. The difference between an asset and a job is not complexity or prestige. It is whether the thing continues working after you walk away from it. Now close the loop. Here is the answer to the question held open earlier. Why do most people not treat knowledge as an asset, and what has to happen before knowledge converts into passive income? The answer is specificity. Vague knowledge does not function as an asset. General enthusiasm about a topic does not attract or hold an audience. What converts knowledge into leverage is the narrowing of it, the decision to go deep into something small rather than shallow across something large. 𝗓𝗏 did not write about home renovation nationwide. She wrote about permitting in 3 counties. The specificity was not a limitation. It was the mechanism. It was the reason contractors in those counties cared enough to pay. Narrow and deep creates trust faster than broad and shallow ever will. The second thing that has to happen is format. Knowledge trapped inside your head has no asset value. Knowledge organized into a form someone else can consume, an email, a recorded explanation, a guide, a structured audio, is intellectual property. It can be copied without diminishing. It can reach 100 people or 100,000 without requiring 100 more hours of your time. The conversion from knowledge to intellectual property is the conversion from labor to architecture. Soon, you are going to meet a claim about the right time to start building passive income that runs straight against the usual belief. After that clicks, it alters what you do this week, not someday. Here is what matters right now. You have specific knowledge. Not general interest, specific, earned, hard-won knowledge about something. How a particular industry works. How a specific process fails in ways outsiders do not see. How a certain type of person navigates a specific problem. That knowledge exists inside you right now as pure potential. It is unformatted. It is not yet pointed at an audience. It is not yet earning anything, but it is real. And in the right format, directed at the right narrow group of people, it is the first asset you could build without $1 of starting capital, without a business license, without a team. Your first passive income stream is almost never financial. It is informational leverage, knowledge formatted and aimed, accumulated into attention, and then, over time, converted into income that does not require your daily presence to continue arriving. The money follows the asset, and the asset you can build first is already inside you. The question the next chapter answers is the one most people ask here. If knowledge becomes an asset, what does that asset actually look like when it starts earning? And how do you build the first version without needing it to be perfect before you begin? Chapter 5. Systems hire people, people stay broke. The answer to that question, what a knowledge asset looks like when it starts earning, is not a better version of you. It is a system that runs without you. That sounds like something on a motivational poster, one nobody actually reads. But it is not a slogan. It is a precise description of the exact mechanism separating people who build lasting wealth from people who stay stuck trading hours for income. No matter how hard they work, no matter how skilled they become. Here is the counterintuitive truth at the center of this chapter. The moment you become excellent at your job, you have made yourself the least likely person to ever get rich doing it. Excellence in execution keeps you executing. It keeps you valuable to the system someone else built. It keeps you producing output that the architect of that system converts into wealth, while you convert it into a salary. If that made you pause, good. Stay with that thought. By the end of this chapter, you will see exactly how the mechanism works. More importantly, you will see how to flip which side of it you are standing on. Here is the question this chapter will hold open. Why do the most disciplined, capable, hardest-working people so rarely become wealthy, while some people who appear to do very little accumulate money as though it arrives on its own schedule? Do not answer that yet. Let the question sit. First, you need to understand what a system actually is. The word gets used carelessly, and the casual version will not serve you. A system, in the sense that matters here, is any arrangement of processes, people, and instructions that produces a result repeatedly without requiring the creator to be present for each repetition. That is the whole definition. Nothing spiritual, nothing complicated. A vending machine is a system. A franchise is a system. A software tool that filters client inquiries, sends automated responses, schedules calls, and collects payments is a system. None of them need the person who designed them to show up every morning. You, showing up every morning, are not a system. You are a component inside someone else's. Revisit where things really stood before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. Not in abstract terms specifically. What was your Monday morning like? Who was deciding what you worked on that day? Who was setting the pace, naming the priority, determining how your time got spent? And at the end of that day, that week, that year, who captured most of the value you generated? If the honest answer is that someone or something other than you held that control, then you were a laborer inside an architect's design. That is not a moral judgment. It is a structural observation. And structure determines the outcome, almost regardless of your effort. This is the effort ceiling, and it is real. When your income depends on your direct participation, it is capped by how many hours exist in a day. You already know this. You have felt it. You hit a point where you cannot earn more without working more, and you cannot work more without sacrificing everything else that makes your life feel worth living. The ceiling is not a personal failure. It is a design feature of any arrangement where your labor is the primary input. No amount of optimization changes the fundamental constraint. You are still the bottleneck. The architect never becomes the bottleneck. The architect builds the road and then collects the toll from every car that uses it, whether the architect is watching or sleeping or sitting on a porch somewhere entirely unbothered. Now meet Diane. Diane spent 11 years in human resources at a mid-sized logistics company. She was genuinely good at her work. Interviewing, compliance, employee relations, onboarding. She had developed a precise instinct for all of it. The kind that only comes from years of doing the same work with full attention. When she left to consult independently, she charged a fair rate, landed clients without much trouble, and within 8 months was fully booked. Clients loved her. Referrals came regularly. She was, by every conventional measure, a success. She was also exhausted. Every new client meant a new intake conversation. Every intake conversation meant 90 minutes of her time before she had earned a single dollar from that relationship. She was spending roughly 12 hours a week on intake alone, qualifying clients, gathering background, answering the same category of questions, explaining her process, sending follow-up materials. 12 hours, every week, gone before the actual work began. One afternoon, Diane asked herself a different kind of question. Not how do I do this better, but what would need to be true for this to happen without me? She spent one focused weekend building a structured intake system, an intake form that gathered the detailed background she had always been collecting by hand, a recorded video that answered the 8 questions every prospect asked, every single time, an automated scheduling tool, a short document explaining her methodology so thoroughly that by the time someone arrived at their first paid session, they already understood the framework she was going to use. The system cost her 1 weekend to build and a modest monthly fee to run. Within 3 weeks, she had recovered 22 hours a month. Within 6 weeks, it was closer to 30. She did not replace herself. She replaced the repetition. Let that settle before we continue. What Diane built was not a miracle. It was not technical genius. It was the result of one honest question asked in the right direction. She stopped asking how to do her work faster. She started asking what parts of her work did not actually need her at all. That question is the gateway. That question is the entire difference between staying a laborer, even a well-paid one, and beginning to function as an architect. Here is the principle underneath all of this. Every hour you spend working inside someone else's system is an hour not spent designing your own. Read that again with the full weight of what it means. Not as a criticism of employment, not as an argument that working for others is somehow shameful, but as a precise accounting of where time goes and what time spent in design returns compared to time spent in execution. The laborer's hours produce linear output, 1 hour in, 1 unit out. The architect's hours produce infrastructure, 1 hour in, and then that infrastructure runs, tomorrow, next month, 3 years from now, generating output the architect does not have to generate again. This is sleeping money. Not money from doing nothing, but money from having done the design work once, thoroughly, and then stepping back while the design keeps working. The money does not know you are asleep. The system does not require your consciousness to continue functioning. This is not laziness. This is the most intelligent form of effort directed at building something that outlasts the effort itself. Now close the loop on the question this chapter asked you to hold. Why do disciplined, capable, hardworking people so rarely become wealthy, while others who appear to work less accumulate money almost passively? The answer is not luck, though luck plays a role. The answer is not intelligence, though intelligence helps. The answer is architectural positioning. The hardest workers are almost always laborers inside excellent systems. The people accumulating money passively are almost always the architects of those systems, or they have built their own. The effort is not the differentiator. The position is. You can be the most dedicated tile setter in the city, and the architect still earns more on the day your work is finished. Not because your work was worth less, but because the architect owns what you built together. You do not need to quit your job tomorrow. You do not need to burn down the arrangements that currently pay your bills. What you need is to begin designing something in parallel. A small system, a first version, an imperfect structure that starts doing one small repetitive thing on your behalf while you are occupied elsewhere. Diane did not start by automating her whole practice. She started by automating intake, one piece. The one piece consuming the most time for the least specialized return. Later on, you are going to meet a claim about starting small that runs straight against the usual belief. And once you see it, the contradiction resolves in a way that changes how quickly you act. For now, carry one practical question into the next piece of your thinking. Where in your working life is something happening repeatedly? Something that does not actually require your unique judgment each time. Something that could be captured in a form, a document, an automated sequence, or a recorded explanation. That is the thread. Pull it. The system does not care whether you designed it out of brilliance or desperation, or a tired Sunday afternoon when you simply decided you were done doing the same thing for the 100th time. The system only cares that it was built. And once it is built, it begins working whether you do or not. That is not a metaphor. That is the mechanics of how one group of people exits the effort ceiling while another group, often more talented, often more disciplined, stays pressed against it for decades without understanding why. You already know which side you want to be standing on. The only question left is the one the next chapter answers. What does the first version of your own system actually look like? And what does it need to cost you to build it? Chapter 6. Compounding only works without your hands. Money you are not touching right now is growing. Money you are touching is not. That single sentence contains more practical financial instruction than most people absorb in a decade. And the reason most people never hear it is simple. The entire system around them is designed to keep their hands busy. Busy hands feel productive. Busy hands feel responsible. And busy hands over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years quietly destroy the one mechanism that could have made them wealthy. Every time you log in to check, every time you rebalance, react, adjust, or second guess, every time you pull back and wait for a better moment, the compounding engine sputters, not dramatically, invisibly. The cost is not this month's return. The cost is every dollar that return would have become across the years it no longer has. The question this chapter answers is the one the previous chapter left hanging in the air. What does your system actually need to look like to work? The answer begins here, with understanding why compounding breaks the moment you become part of its mechanism. You already know the general shape of compound interest. Money earns a return. That return earns its own return. Time multiplies the whole thing. Everyone has seen the chart. The line that stays flat for years and then bends sharply upward like something finally escaped gravity. That curve is real. It happens. But there is a version of that chart almost no one shows you. And it is the one that matters most for how you actually behave with your money. Picture the same curve, same starting amount, same percentage return. But this time, at regular intervals along the horizontal axis, the line dips. Small dips at first, 0.25% here, 0.5% there. Then the dips start coming more often because the person watching the money is checking it more often. Then one large dip happens after a scary news cycle and a 3-week pause in contributions. Then another after a rebalancing decision that felt smart in the moment. At the end of 30 years, the person who experienced those dips ends with a number significantly smaller than the uninterrupted curve. Not marginally smaller, significantly. By some calculations, a modest interference pattern across 3 decades can cost more than the original principal invested. The mechanism did not fail. The human presence inside the mechanism is what failed. This is the interference dip. And it is not caused by bad luck or wrong choices. It is caused by attention itself. Take yourself back to the state of your finances back then, without drifting into anything else. Not emotionally, not professionally, just financially. Was there an account you opened and then moved money out of because something felt uncertain? Was there an investment you stopped contributing to for a few months during a hard stretch, then never quite restarted at the full amount? Was there a plan that required no action from you, and somehow that quality made you nervous, made it feel irresponsible, made you feel like you should be doing something? If you can name one of those moments, you already understand the interference dip from the inside. The problem is not that you made bad decisions. The problem is that you were present at all. Here is the principle that cuts through everything. Compounding is a process, not a product. It does not belong to any specific asset. It happens when returns are reinvested automatically, consistently, across time, without interruption. The interruption does not have to be dramatic. Missing 1 month of contributions to an index fund because life got complicated does not feel catastrophic. But across 20 years of that behavior, across 12 potential interruptions per year, each one nudging the compounding curve slightly lower, the total deviation from the undisturbed line becomes the difference between a comfortable retirement and a desperate one, between options and the absence of options, between sleeping soundly at 50 and working because you have to at 65. As this book keeps moving, you are going to meet a claim about financial discipline that runs straight against the usual belief. Once you grasp that turn, it alters how you act. For now, stay with this. The interference dip is not only about markets or investment accounts. It operates anywhere compounding can exist. A rental property managed by the owner who calls their own tenants, handles their own repairs, and personally approves every decision is not a compounding asset. It is a second job. It generates income, yes, but that income is not compounding because the owner's time and attention are perpetually required inputs. Remove the owner and the income stops. That means the owner is the mechanism, not the system. And a mechanism that requires you is an effort ceiling with better marketing. The architect does not pour concrete, the laborer does. You are building toward becoming the architect. That does not mean you do nothing at the beginning. It means that everything you do at the beginning is in service of a system that will eventually run without you. The setup costs are real. The learning curve is real. The early hours are real, but they are finite. They are scaffolding, not structure. Once the structure stands, the scaffolding comes down. And here is where most people misunderstand the whole enterprise. They see the scaffolding phase and assume the scaffolding is the work. So they never take it down. They keep optimizing, adjusting, improving, tweaking, and calling it responsibility when it is actually interference. Consider a woman named Renata. She was 31 years old, working as a project manager at a mid-sized logistics company, earning enough to save about $400 a month after expenses. She had read about index funds. She set one up. For the first 3 months, she checked it every other day. When the market dropped 6% in a single week, she pulled half her money out and kept it in a savings account until things felt stable. Then she put it back in at a slightly different allocation because she had read something new. Then she switched platforms because the fees were fractionally lower. Then she paused contributions for 2 months after a car repair. Then she rebalanced again after a podcast made her feel her original allocation was wrong. Renata was not lazy. Renata was not irresponsible. Renata cared deeply about her financial future. That caring was exactly the problem. 7 years later, a colleague named Dennis had started investing the same amount at the same time. Same $400 a month. Same broad market fund. Dennis checked his account twice a year. He had automated his contributions and had never once changed his allocation. He had not listened to any podcasts about it. When the market dropped, he did not know until weeks later. He did not enjoy the process the way Renata did. He found it boring. He let it be boring. Dennis had 40% more money than Renata after 7 years. 40%. From the same starting point. The same monthly investment. The only variable was presence. Now here is what the parable does not tell you to do. It does not tell you to be Dennis forever. It tells you to understand what Dennis was doing without realizing it. Denny's had, accidentally, designed a system that ran without him. Renata had designed a system that required her. The goal is to do what Denny's did on purpose, not from boredom or ignorance, from architecture. What does designing for your own absence actually mean in practice? It starts with a question you may never have been asked directly. For every financial mechanism you currently have, ask yourself, if I disappeared for 18 months, would this thing still work? Would the contributions still flow? Would the returns still compound? Would the income still arrive? If the answer is no, you are in the mechanism. You are a working part of a machine that should be self-sustaining. And the machine will stop the moment you do. Automation is the most underrated word in personal finance, not because it is sophisticated, because it is boring enough that most people underestimate it. Automated contributions, automatically reinvested returns, automatically collected rent deposited to an account you check quarterly. The boring rhythm of a system that requires nothing from you on a Tuesday is the sound of compounding happening correctly. The exciting rhythm of checking, reacting, adjusting, and optimizing is the sound of the interference dip forming in real time. Sleeping money is not passive money in the sense that it does nothing. It is doing everything. It is compounding, reinvesting, working inside the market's own mechanism, growing in a direction that your attention would only disrupt. Your job, once the system is set, is to leave it alone, not forever. You revisit annually. You redirect when major life changes demand it, but those are scheduled appointments, not daily supervision. The effort ceiling is a physical reality for anyone whose income requires their presence. There are only so many hours. There is only so much attention. Every hour you spend managing a financial mechanism is an hour you could have spent building a new one, or resting. The laborer who manages their own job has one income stream and full attention on it. The architect who has built several self-running systems has multiple income streams and attention free for the next structure. The identity question lives just beneath this entire chapter, and it is the one the next chapter goes into directly, because here is what nobody warns you about when you begin removing yourself from your financial mechanisms. Something inside you resists, not because the strategy is wrong, because your sense of worth has been tied to effort for so long that a system running without you does not feel earned. It feels suspicious. It feels like you are cheating at a game where the rules say you must struggle. That feeling is the final piece of the hustle myth, not the long hours, not the exhaustion, the guilt, the specific guilt of a system that works while you sleep. That guilt is not a moral signal. It is a conditioned response. And the next chapter is where you examine who installed it and why. But before you get there, carry this. Compounding is not a reward for good financial choices. It is a mathematical process that operates correctly only when left alone. Your role in it is to design the conditions for it, fund it, automate it, and then practice the most counterintuitive skill in personal finance. Walk away. Chapter 7. Debt is an architect's favorite tool. Walking away is not the same as giving up. Sometimes the most precise move you can make is the one that costs you nothing, no sweat, no urgency, no performance. That same principle applies to this chapter, and it is going to sound wrong before it sounds right. Debt is not the enemy of wealth. It is the primary tool most wealthy people use to build it. That sounds like the kind of line a credit card company prints on a brochure. It is not. It is what separates the people who design financial systems from the people who live inside systems designed by someone else. You have been told that debt is danger. That borrowing is a sign of weakness. That the responsible path is to save carefully and spend only what you own. That story is not wrong for everyone. But for you, someone trying to build income that does not require your presence, that story has an enormous blind spot. By the time this chapter ends, you will see exactly where that blind spot is, and why the people who found it earlier are already sleeping through mornings you are still waking up early for. Here is the question this chapter is going to hold open for a while. Is debt a weight, or is it a wire? Keep that question somewhere close. Marcus was 31 when he took out a $15,000 home equity line of credit. His house had appreciated modestly, nothing spectacular, just the quiet kind of gain that happens when you hold something long enough. The bank was willing to let him borrow against that equity. He had two choices sitting in front of him. His friend Devin had the same choice the same year. Same credit line, roughly the same amount. They talked about it over lunch. Devin knew what he wanted. He had been driving a 7-year-old sedan that embarrassed him on dates, and he walked into a dealership the following Saturday and put the money toward a new car. The payments were manageable. The car was clean and quiet and smelled like something new. Devin felt like he had finally caught up. Marcus bought a duplex. The duplex was 43 miles from where Marcus lived. It was not beautiful. The carpet in Unit 2 was the color of old mustard, and the water heater was close to the end of its life. Marcus paid a property manager a percentage of the rent to handle the tenants, the calls, the minor repairs. He visited the property once in the first year and once in the second. By month 9, the rent from both units exceeded his mortgage payment, his management fee, and the monthly interest on his HELOC. The duplex was producing more each month than he had spent to enter the deal. Devin's car, by month 9, had depreciated by roughly $4,000. His monthly payment had not changed. The asset was smaller. The obligation was identical. Think about that for a moment. Both men used credit. Both men took on a debt obligation. The structure of the transaction looked almost the same from the outside. But one of them had attached his borrowed money to something that earned, and one of them had attached it to something that spent. The debt did not decide the outcome. The destination of the debt decided everything. This is what most conversations about money get wrong. They frame debt as either good or bad, safe or dangerous, wise or foolish. But those are not the useful questions. The useful question is whether the thing you bought with borrowed money produces income while you are not touching it. If it does, the debt is working. If it does not, you are working for the debt. There is an effort ceiling built into every job, every hustle, every side income that requires your direct and continuous participation. You can only work so many hours. You can only take so many clients. You can only stretch so far before the number you earn reaches its physical limit. Hustle culture sells the idea that effort without a ceiling is possible, that if you simply refuse to stop, the income will keep rising. But your body has a ceiling. Your attention has a ceiling. And somewhere behind the grind, there is an invisible wall you cannot push through no matter how early you wake up. Debt, used the way Marcus used it, is one of the few tools that lets you place earning power on the other side of that wall. Here is the part most people skip over because it sounds too simple. Marcus did not become wealthier than Devin because he was smarter, or more disciplined, or more willing to sacrifice. Marcus became wealthier because he understood what an architect understands. That structure does work on your behalf. The architect does not carry the weight of the building. The building carries itself because of how it was designed. Marcus designed a structure that carried financial weight for him. Devin bought a symbol of arrival and then paid for it every month for 5 years. You have probably done some version of what Devin did. Not the car, necessarily. Maybe it was a renovation that made a rented apartment nicer than it needed to be. Maybe it was a balance transfer that became a vacation. Maybe it was a loan you took because you deserved something, because you had worked hard enough that the reward felt justified. There is no judgment in that observation. The honest truth is that Devin's decision is the one most people make, because Devin's decision felt like living, and Marcus's decision felt like waiting. But here is what Marcus knew that Devin did not. The duplex was not waiting. The duplex was earning while Marcus slept. That money arrived on the first of every month with no requirement that Marcus be present, alert, engaged, or productive. His sleeping money capital deployed into a structure that earned without his effort was running a quiet, invisible parallel life alongside his regular income. While Marcus sat at his job, while he ate dinner, while he drove somewhere on a weekend, the duplex was open for business. That is what the 𝗓𝗓𝗧𝗘 equation never accounts for. It accounts for your hours. It accounts for your skills. It accounts for your willingness to stay late and push harder, but it has no column for income that requires none of those things, because the people who built that equation needed you to keep showing up. They still need you to keep showing up. Call up where things really stood before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. Not in terms of income or savings or any number you can measure. Think about what you believed. Think about what the word debt meant to you then. For most people, that word arrives paired with anxiety, with parents' warnings, with the memory of a balance that felt impossible to move. 3 years ago, debt was probably a wall, a thing to escape, to reduce, to apologize for when the conversation turned to finances. Now consider the possibility that the wall was always also a door, and that whether you walked through it as an escape or as an entrance was entirely up to how you framed the first step. An architect sees a load-bearing wall and asks what it can support. A laborer sees the same wall and asks who they need to ask permission to remove it. Both are looking at the same structure. Only one of them is designing from it. Good debt has one defining feature. It multiplies sleeping money. It takes $1 you borrow and places it inside a mechanism that produces more dollars without requiring you to operate that mechanism by hand. A rental property, a small commercial unit, a loan used to purchase income-producing equipment. These are mechanisms. The borrowed dollar enters the mechanism and becomes a current. You are not in the mechanism. You designed it, funded it, and stepped back. Bad debt has a different defining feature. It multiplies effort obligations. When you borrow to consume a car, a vacation, furniture, the version of yourself you feel you owe the world, the thing you bought does not earn back what you borrowed. It requires you to earn more to service the debt. The payment arrives every month whether or not you showed up this month. The debt has hired you. You work for it now. This is not a moral distinction. Devin is not a worse person than Marcus. Devin wanted a normal thing that normal people want. But Devin built a structure that obligated his future hours, and Marcus built a structure that freed them. Marcus visited that duplex a second time 3 years after purchase. He walked the units, shook hands with his property manager, drove home. On the drive back, he calculated that the duplex had returned more than the original $15,000 in net cash flow. The debt had been used up. The asset remained. The asset would keep earning whether or not Marcus ever visited again. The question this chapter opened with, is debt a weight, or is it a wire, has a conditional answer. Debt is whatever you connect it to. A wire carrying current into a machine that produces something is infrastructure. A wire dangling in open air, connected to nothing productive, is a hazard. In a later section, you are going to meet a claim about how fast wealth actually moves that runs straight against the usual belief. When that point settles, it alters every timeline you have set for yourself. For now, the principle is this. The laborer borrows to survive the present. The architect borrows to design the future. Devin bought a car and paid it off in 5 years. Marcus bought a duplex, and in 5 years it had paid for itself, returned his invested capital, and was still running on the first of every month without asking for anything in return. One of them is still working for the debt. Which structure are you building? Chapter 8. The exit ramp they never told you existed. Right now, something is disappearing. Not from your wallet, from your future. Every week you spend trading hours for income without building anything that earns on its own is a week your baseline cost of living rises without your earning capacity rising to match it. Rent goes up. Groceries go up. The gap between what things cost and what your effort alone can produce keeps widening. Slowly, like water rising in a room with no exit. Here is the part no one explains clearly. It is not rising because you are failing. It is rising because the equation you were handed is broken by design. You were given a ladder and told it leads to freedom. But the ladder only goes higher inside the same building. Nobody pointed to the door on the side wall. Nobody told you there was an exit ramp. That ramp exists. It has always existed. And by the time this chapter ends, you will be able to see exactly where it is. Which structure are you building? That question from the last chapter is not rhetorical. It is the most practically important question in your financial life right now. The answer determines whether you eventually reach a specific, definable moment, or spend the next 40 years optimizing a system that was never designed to let you leave it. There is a moment. It is real. It is measurable. Most people have never been told it exists in this form, which is why most people never aim for it directly. They aim for retirement, which is vague. They aim for financial freedom, which sounds like a slogan. They aim for enough, which they could never precisely define. But the moment itself is precise. It has a number. It has a date. And when it arrives, your relationship to work, to effort, to obligation, to the alarm clock, changes in a way that cannot be undone. There is an open question under everything that follows while the chapter does its work. What exactly happens at that moment, and why does reaching it require a completely different map than the one you have probably been following? Let's set the scene first. Picture Marcus, age 31, sitting at his kitchen table on a Tuesday morning. He is not rich by most conventional definitions. He does not own a yacht. He does not live in a penthouse. His apartment is clean and modest, 2 bedrooms in a mid-sized city, the kind of neighborhood where the coffee shop knows your name and the parking is still free. But Marcus is doing something this Tuesday morning that almost no one his age is doing. He is making a list of things he wants to do today. Not tasks from a boss, not deliverables from a client, just things. A walk, a call with his brother, 2 hours reading a book on urban planning because it interests him. Maybe some work on the small consulting project he picked up last month because the problem seemed genuinely fascinating. Marcus still earns money. He still does things that could be called work, but none of it is compulsory. None of it is the rent payment, because the rent is already covered. So are the groceries, the insurance, the utilities, the small daily costs that used to shape every decision he made. Those costs are handled, not by his effort today, by the architecture he spent 4 years building while working a regular job and treating every excess dollar not as spending money but as material. He did not retire. He is 31. He simply crossed the exit ramp. Think about that for a second. Not the details of how Marcus built his architecture. You will encounter something later in this book that directly contradicts what most people believe about how long that kind of building actually takes. After that really registers, it alters how you start counting time. For now, hold the image. A Tuesday morning. A list of things he wants, not things he owes. What made that Tuesday possible was not a windfall. It was not a lucky break. It was a crossing, a specific threshold that every person building passive income architecture is quietly moving toward, whether they name it or not. That threshold has a technical description, but it does not require technical language to understand. It is simply the point at which what your money earns on its own equals what your life costs to run. Monthly passive income minus monthly baseline expenses equals 0 or better. That is the crossing. That is the ramp. The effort ceiling, which hustle culture sells as something you push through by working harder, does not get pushed through. It dissolves, not because you ground it down with more effort, but because you stopped needing to push against it. When your architecture earns your baseline, the ceiling is gone. You are no longer pressing upward against it. You are standing in open air. Now here is what almost nobody talks about. And this is the part that changes how you plan. Most financial advice treats this crossing as the endpoint. Save enough, retire, stop. But that is not what the crossing actually is. The crossing is not an ending. It is a reclassification. Every hour of effort you apply after the crossing has a completely different quality than every hour before it. Before the crossing, your effort is survival. After the crossing, your effort is optional. Same effort, different nature. The work you do after that point is chosen work. It might look identical from the outside. You might keep the same job for another year because you find it meaningful, or because the extra income compounds your architecture faster. But it is no longer mandatory. And that distinction, mandatory versus elective, is not a small thing. It is the difference between a life that belongs to you and a life that belongs to the system you are caught in. Bring to mind where things really stood before these last 3 years unfolded, without polishing the memory. The decisions you made, the stress you carried, the options you turned down because you could not afford the financial exposure. How many of those decisions were shaped by the fact that your income was purely effort-dependent? How many things did you not try, not say, not pursue, because the cost of being wrong was too high? That is not a character flaw. That is the math of mandatory effort. When everything depends on the next paycheck, risk feels like recklessness. But when your baseline is covered by sleeping money, by income that flows whether you show up or not, risk becomes something you can afford to take. Carefully, thoughtfully, on your own terms. That is what the exit ramp gives you, not leisure, not idleness. Options. Now the question of who you are on the other side of that crossing is worth sitting with. Because most people, when they imagine financial independence, imagine a version of themselves lying on a beach or sleeping late forever. That fantasy is fine for about 3 days. After that, it reveals something important about human nature. People want to contribute. They want to build. They want to feel useful. They want to be absorbed in problems that interest them. The difference is not whether you work. The difference is why. Right now, if you are like most people in their 20s or early 30s, the answer to why you work is survival, obligation, clock. The thing that happens if you do not. That is the laborer's answer, and it is not a moral failing. It is a structural condition. The architect's answer is different. The architect works because the problem is interesting. Because the building is not finished yet. Because adding another floor is enjoyable on its own terms. Same action, different relationship to the action. The exit ramp does not change what you do. It changes who you are while you do it. Here is a thing worth saying plainly because it rarely gets said this way. The reason most people never find the exit ramp is not that they lack intelligence or discipline. It is that they were never shown where it is. They were shown the road that leads to a longer career. They were shown the road that leads to a bigger salary. They were shown the promotion track, the side hustle grind, the investment account that requires decades of contributions. All of those roads can produce good outcomes. But none of them are aimed at the ramp. They are aimed at the highway. And if you spend your life accelerating on a highway, you will travel very far. You will just never exit. The ramp requires you to know the ramp exists. Then it requires you to build toward it specifically. Not toward wealth as an abstract condition, but toward a precise ratio, passive monthly income divided by baseline monthly cost. When that number reaches 1, you cross. Everything you add after that raises the floor and expands your options. But 1 is the crossing. 1 is the ramp. And here is what is remarkable about that number. The chapter opened with a promise to show you this. The number is almost always smaller than you think. Not because costs are low, they may not be, but because most people, when they imagine the life they actually need, load it with imagined obligations. The second car, the bigger apartment, the subscriptions that accumulate like sediment. When you strip it back to the life that actually satisfies you, shelter, food, health, connection, the things that make Tuesday mornings feel worth having, the baseline shrinks, sometimes dramatically, and a smaller target means the crossing comes sooner, often years sooner than your current math suggests. Now, to close the loop that was opened at the start of this chapter, the question was, what exactly happens at that moment, and why does reaching it require a different map? What happens is this. The architecture you have been building stops being a supplement to your effort and starts being the foundation of your life. Effort becomes the extra. Income from sleeping money becomes the floor. And the question you ask every morning changes from what do I have to do today to what do I want to build next. That is the mechanism. That is the specific transition the previous chapters have been preparing you to see. The map is different because the destination is different. You are not aiming for retirement. You are not aiming for a number in an account. You are aiming for a ratio, 1-to-1. Passive income to baseline cost. Everything before that crossing is construction. Everything after it is choice. What would you choose first? Chapter 9. Stop calling yourself a worker. Every civilization that has ever risen and fallen has drawn the same invisible line, not between the rich and the poor, not between the lucky and the unlucky. The line has always been drawn between those who trade time for survival and those who build things that work without them. Across centuries and cultures, in languages that no longer exist, this distinction has meant the difference between a life that expands and a life that stays exactly where it started. The tools change. The principle does not. And you are standing at that line right now. The only question that matters is which side you choose to walk to. That question, which side, is the one the previous chapter left hanging in the air. What would you choose first? Most people hear that question and immediately start listing actions, skills to learn, money to save, steps to execute. They are already doing the wrong thing, not because action is wrong, because they skip the one decision that makes every other decision work. The decision is about who you are, not what you do. Here is the open loop you need to hold in your mind as this chapter moves forward. There is a version of you that could build every system in this book perfectly, follow every principle, and still end up broke. Not because the systems fail, because of a single word you use to describe yourself. You will find out which word before this chapter ends. Marcus does not set an alarm anymore. That detail is important, so let it land. He wakes when his body decides, usually around 8, sometimes later. He makes coffee slowly. He sits on his back porch in the kind of quiet that used to make him anxious because silence once meant he was wasting time. Now the silence means something else entirely. His phone shows him 3 notifications before 9 in the morning. All of them are numbers moving in directions he chose months ago. He does not answer emails until noon. He is not lazy. He is not lucky. He is operating from a completely different identity than the one he started with. You met Marcus in the first chapter. Back then, he was the cautionary image, the guy doing nothing while money was supposed to require suffering. The implication was that ease was the enemy of wealth. That if you were not grinding, you were losing. That image of Marcus sitting still was meant to make you uncomfortable. Look at it again now. That stillness is not the problem. That stillness is the destination. But here is what nobody tells you about reaching it. You cannot get there by working harder toward it. You cannot grind your way into the architect life. The effort ceiling is real, and the ceiling does not care how motivated you are. Every hour of labor has a cap. There is only so much a human body can produce in exchange for time. Every single person who has ever hit the top of their earning potential as a worker has discovered the same uncomfortable truth. The ceiling is not high enough. Go back to where things really stood before these last 3 years unfolded without polishing the memory. Not in terms of income or skill, in terms of how you described yourself when someone asked what you did. Worker, employee, freelancer, consultant, even entrepreneur for many people still secretly means someone who works more hours than any boss would ever demand of them. 3 years ago, if money stopped coming in because you stopped showing up, what would have happened? The answer to that question is the answer to what identity you were actually living from. Most people are living from the laborer identity even when they think they have left it behind. The laborer identity is not about job title. It is a belief system, wired deep, that says your worth is produced by your output. That rest is theft. That if something did not cost you sweat, you do not deserve to keep it. That belief system is not a character flaw. It was installed deliberately and reinforced every day by a culture that profits from your productivity. Hustle culture does not want you to stop. A worker who believes effort equals outcome will keep producing indefinitely. They will celebrate their exhaustion. They will post about their 4 a.m. wake-ups and their 18-hour days and call it discipline. And the system applauds. Because a disciplined worker is the most valuable raw material there is, not for the worker's benefit, for everyone who owns the thing the worker is building. This is the tension that the laborer identity creates. You work more, you earn more, and you stay exactly as dependent as you were when you started. The income is higher, but the trap is identical, because the moment you stop, it stops. That is not wealth. That is a faster treadmill. The architect identity is not about working less. Get that wrong and you will misuse everything in this book. The architect identity is about what you are working on. A laborer works inside a system. An architect builds one. The architect may work intensely. They may go through seasons of long hours and deep focus. But the work being done is not exchangeable for hourly output. It is structural. It creates something that continues after the effort stops. Here is a woman named Priya. She was a marketing contractor, billing $110 an hour, working 45 hours a week, proud of her rate and terrified of a single slow month. She identified as a freelancer. She introduced herself that way at every dinner party, every networking event. Freelancer. The word sounds free. It is not. She had replaced an employer's ceiling with her own. One afternoon she sat down and wrote out exactly what would happen to her income if she took 2 weeks off with no warning. The number she arrived at was 0. That calculation changed something in how she saw herself, not what she did, who she was inside the work. She spent the next 8 months building a content licensing system, packaging her marketing frameworks into a product that other contractors could buy and use. In month 9, she took those 2 weeks off. The income did not go to 0. She came home to 4 new license purchases made while she was on a beach without her laptop. She did not describe herself as a freelancer after that. She did not have a new word at first, but the old one no longer fit, and that mattered more than finding the replacement. You do not need the perfect word immediately. What you need is to retire the old one. Stop calling yourself a worker. Not out loud, not in your head, not in the quiet moment before sleep when you tally up whether you did enough today. The enough question is the laborer's question. The architect does not ask if they did enough. The architect asks if what they built is still running. This is where the open loop closes. The word that can sabotage every system in this book, the word that can make you follow every principle perfectly and still end up dependent and exhausted, that word is worker. Not because work is shameful, because the identity attached to that word carries a hidden operating system, one that demands you earn through effort, one that makes sleeping money feel undeserved, one that will quietly undo your passive income architecture every time your systems start to work, because somewhere underneath, you believe that money you did not suffer for is money you are about to lose. Identity precedes behavior. You cannot build structures that earn while you sleep if your deepest self believes that sleeping through income is cheating. Marcus on his porch is not the image of laziness. He is the image of a man whose architecture is working. The doing nothing that looked like failure in Chapter 1 is the same doing nothing that Chapter 10 will ask you to claim as your own. The difference between those 2 versions of doing nothing is not the bank account. The bank account is a result. The difference is identity. Who are you when no one is asking what you do for work? That answer is either the foundation you build on or the ceiling you are already pressing against. Chapter 10. Doing nothing is the final skill. You have made it to the last chapter, and something about that fact might feel incomplete. Like you are waiting for the big instruction, the final push, the piece that pulls everything together into a clear and urgent to-do list. Notice that feeling. It is the same reflex that has kept most people working harder every year and arriving at the same place financially. You are still, even now, waiting to be told what to do next. That impulse is not a flaw. It was trained into you carefully and early. But here, at the end of this book, the thing worth sitting with is this. What if the final skill has nothing to do with doing more? What if everything you have learned points toward a single destination? And what if that destination looks from the outside like nothing at all? That question is not rhetorical. This chapter will answer it directly. But first, you have to see where you started. Think back to the image from the very beginning of this book. The janitor and the professional. Remember how that contrast landed. The janitor pushing a mop at midnight, visibly working, hours clearly spent, effort obvious and measurable. The professional walking to a car at 6 in the evening, day done, hands clean. At the time, that contrast was introduced to create a question about value. But there is a second reading of that image. Most people never reach it. Here is what you likely did not notice then. The janitor is paid only when they are present. Every dollar requires physical attendance. Stop showing up, the money stops too. The arrangement is honest. It is also a trap with no ceiling and no exit. The professional earns more per hour, yes, but the real difference is not the rate. The real difference is the architecture beneath the income. Most professionals have a higher ceiling, but they still have one. They are still trading hours. They are still one injury, one illness, 1 month of absence away from a paused income. The person this book has been building toward is neither of them. That person is the architect, and the architect's greatest day is the day when nothing they physically did produced the income. The system did. Let that settle for a moment before moving past it. Ramona was a graphic designer in her early 30s. She billed clients by the project, worked weekends when deadlines closed in, and told herself that the freedom she wanted was one big contract away. Then 2 years of big contracts came and went. She found herself with a better portfolio and the same financial floor. The work was real. The income was real, but nothing compounded. Nothing ran while she slept. Every Monday was a reset. She described it once as running on a treadmill that someone else controlled the speed on. She was skilled, disciplined, and exhausted, not because she lacked effort, because effort was the only input she had ever installed. The shift for Ramona was not dramatic. She did not quit her clients. She started asking one question about every hour of work she logged: could a system do this instead of me? Not a better me, not a future hire, not some tool she had not yet found. A system. Something with rules, triggers, and outputs that did not require her presence to function. Slowly, that question changed what she built. Her design templates became a product. Her client intake became automated. Her best-performing social posts became a rotating library that ran on a schedule she set once. Within 14 months, she had 3 income sources that did not require her to be awake when they paid her. She still took client work, but she stopped needing to. Now here is the point that Ramona's story circles but does not land on its own. The system did not make her lazy. It made her free to do only the work that genuinely required her. The distinction is everything. Stop for a moment and think about the past 7 days of your own working life. Not in judgment, just as observation. How many hours did you spend doing something that could have been handled by a process, a template, a piece of software, or a clearly written instruction set? Be honest with yourself here. That number is not a reflection of your worth. It is a measurement of unreplaced effort. And unreplaced effort is the raw material of the effort ceiling. The effort ceiling is the hard limit of a life built only on personal output. You can raise it with more skills, more hours, more caffeine, more ambition. But it remains a ceiling. The architect does not raise the ceiling. The architect removes it entirely by building structures that produce without their hands directly on the work. This is what sleeping money actually means, not passive income in the vague poster quote sense. Sleeping money is specific. It is an asset that earns while the person who built it is doing something else. It could be a digital product purchased at 3 in the morning. A rental property generating income on a Tuesday you spent at the beach. A portfolio dividend deposited on a day you never thought about it. The mechanism varies. The principle is identical. The income does not know whether you are watching it. And here, finally, is the reversal that this whole book has been building toward. In the first chapter, doing nothing carried shame. The person who appeared to be idle while others worked was suspect, lazy, undeserving. That framing is the engine of hustle culture. It keeps people producing. It keeps the exchange of hours for dollars normalized, even celebrated. Work harder, grind longer, earn your rest. The person sitting still is losing ground to the person in motion. But you have learned something different now. The millionaire's greatest achievement is not the deal, not the product, not the investment decision. The greatest achievement is a single ordinary day where nothing they did produced the income. The system did. That day, that quiet, unremarkable day, is the proof that the architecture works. It is the graduation, the measure of everything built correctly. Doing nothing is not the absence of discipline. It is the output of a fully functioning wealth system. It means the work was done earlier, at the level of design rather than execution. The laborer works the day to produce the day's income. The architect works the design so the building produces income without the architect inside it. Here is your practice. 1 hour. Find 1 hour in your current week that you are spending on a task that repeats. Something you do again and again, week after week. Ask whether that hour could be handled by a template, a tool, an automated sequence, or a process you write down once and hand off. If the answer is yes, your task this week is not to do that hour. Your task is to replace it. Not to eliminate the output, to remove yourself from the process of producing it. 1 hour. That is the entire instruction. Because this is how the architecture grows, not in dramatic pivots, in single hours reclaimed from effort and given to structure. 1 hour at a time, you move from laborer to architect. 1 system at a time, you move from ceiling to open sky. You began this book hearing that doing nothing was the lazy person's fantasy, the wish of someone unwilling to put in the work. You end it knowing that doing nothing is the final and hardest skill. Hard because it requires you to build something invisible, patient, and not immediately rewarded. Hard because the culture around you will still mistake your stillness for idleness. Hard because every instinct you were given says that value comes from visible effort. But you know what the system looks like now. You know the difference between the janitor's clock and the architect's blueprint. You know what sleeping money means. You know why the effort ceiling exists. And you know how to stop pressing against it. The question that opened this book, the one about whether the person doing less could somehow end up with more, has been answered. Not as a trick, not as a fantasy, as a design principle available to anyone willing to stop measuring their worth in hours spent. You are not behind. You are at the beginning of a completely different kind of work. Now build something that runs without you.